And so we're singing our Alleluias today on this, the last Sunday in the weeks of Epiphany. Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, and before we drop down into the holy season of Lent, we're on the mountaintop with Jesus. Luke tells us Jesus took with him Peter and John and James, and they went up the mountain. And over the years, pilgrims from this church have climbed that same mountain. Whenever we go on pilgrimage to the land of the Holy One, there's always a day set aside to go to Mount Tabor. And my guess is that Jesus knew every nook and cranny of that mountain. It was there in the distance, 8 miles from Nazareth. He probably explored it as a young person. Maybe he camped out on the mountain, sleeping under the stars. Who knows? But it's a quiet place, a perfect place for prayer. It's peaceful there on the mountaintop. There are gentle winds, and there's the olive trees. There's a panoramic view of the valley below, and far off, just in the distance, you can see the Sea of Galilee. And the Church of the Transfiguration sits and covers the holy site, and it has side chapels and icons and beautiful frescoes of Elijah and Moses and Jesus and the frightened 3 apostles flattened on the ground. On one of the pilgrimages, I asked a very patient elderly Franciscan priest who was greeting us at the door a question that he had been asked more times than he preferred. I asked him, "Tell me, Father, is this truly the site of the Transfiguration?" He looked at me, he shook his head, he smiled and said, "Well, when Cyril was Bishop of Jerusalem in the early 300s, he thought so." And so it's been the tradition of the church ever since. And then he looked at me and he said, come with me, Anne, come with me. And he led me to a place in the church where there was a grill covering an opening on the floor, and we looked down beneath the grill. And beneath the nave of the Church of the Transfiguration is an archaeological site where ancient altars to the Canaanite god Baal had been unearthed. Baal, as you may remember, translates as Lord, as owner. And the priest said to me, "It would make sense, don't you think? That it would be here that Jesus would come to pray. It would be here where the fullness of his identity would be revealed over the lesser gods, unveiled in his glory. It's here." And remember, it was just after days he had told his disciples, the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, be rejected, killed, and on the 3rd day be raised. Jesus said, "Let these words sink into your ears. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed by human hands." You know, all of this must have been very heavy on the mind of Jesus. Facing death, facing this, he needed a quiet place, a place of comfort, a place that he knew, a place perhaps where he had prayed since he was young. The pilgrimage group, we prayed in the church for a while, and then we spent the rest of the afternoon sitting on the hillside, overlooking the valley, where Gideon chose his army and where Deborah and the militia leader Barak victoriously led Israel into battle. It's a good Sunday afternoon read from the book of Judges, just saying that. And we sat overlooking the plain of Jezreel, where some think, according to the book of Revelation, the last great battle between good and evil will take place at the end of time. And so clearly, this isn't just any mountain that Jesus came to. As the ledge was growing more and more narrow that he was walking, his days were numbered. He was on his way to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets. And so he prayed. He prayed above the fields of old battles where God chose the weak to defeat the strong. Think Gideon. Above altars built to idols that neither Baal nor any other the substitutes with which we replace God, and God knows there's lots of those, that no other substitute could be Lord or owner over our own lives. No to this. No to that which corrupts and destroys God's people. No. And it's here that Jesus poured out from the depths of his soul what was happening in his life and what he was facing. Here, where God's faithfulness in the past and the promise of God in the future intersected with his calling as son, the chosen one. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have a variation of this mountaintop story, but clearly nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared the three for what they were about to witness that day. Luke tells us that they were weighed down with sleep. Well, yes, we understand that. Climbing Tabor can be arduous. It's a 3-hour climb to the top. We took a taxi cab, but it's a 3-hour climb to the top. But they were awakened by what opened their eyes. There was not thunder and lightning as there was on Mount Sinai when Moses went up the mountain. No, this time it was so different. Jesus was transformed before them. Or, as another translation reads, his appearance changed from the inside out. His clothing dazzling, shimmering, glistening white, brighter than any light we could possibly know. It seemed as if he had caught fire from within himself, light seeping through his bones, his flesh, light emanating outward from him. Now, the Eastern Orthodox Church has beautiful icons of this. And the Eastern Church is quick to tell us that the light that flows from Jesus is not created light, like that from the sun. It isn't a phenomenon of this world. This light is God. Brilliant, blinding light shining from the person of Jesus. His face was radiant. His body was, leaking light. And Peter, James, and John were gripped by this, both shock, amazement, and yes, terror. Is this the same Jesus that we just hiked up the mountain with? See, the veil had been pulled back between the realm of God, God's time, and our time. And they saw Jesus. They saw him communing with Moses, the great deliverer, and Elijah, who defeated the 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. And Jesus, Elijah, and Moses were discussing what generations of the prophets had longed to see, the great and full deliverance of God's people. And Luke tells us that the topic of the discussion was the departure of Jesus, his approaching death, and what he would accomplish in Jerusalem. And Peter, you gotta love Peter. He always had something to say. Peter the leader, you found himself saying, tents, Jesus. Oh, God, we need tents. We need to build something, dwelling places, booths or something. We gotta do something, a tent for you, Jesus, and Elijah, Moses. But no one, not even Peter, could yet possibly understand what God had in mind, that the true and real dwelling place forever is in Christ. And before Peter could finish his babbling, finish his thought, they were within a luminous cloud and covered by it, and they were flattened beneath its thickness, enveloped by God's holy presence, surrounded by the heaviness of God's glory. And then from within the cloud, they heard the voice of God speak directly to the three of them, saying the only thing that the Father has ever said that's recorded in the New Testament. This is my Son, the chosen. Listen to him. How long they were enveloped by the cloud of God's holy presence, we don't know. But there's one small detail that Matthew adds to this story. It's the detail that I just love. Matthew adds that, when the cloud was lifted and Jesus, he drew close to them, he touched them, he spoke to their fear, telling them, do not be afraid. And when they looked up, they would see only Jesus, their friend, the one they had climbed the mountain with. There's so much in Scripture that's missing, I think. I would like to know what they talked about when they walked down the mountain. Were they overwhelmed by the enormity of the holiness that they had just experienced? N.T. Wright, the retired Bishop of Durham in England, adds this: there are times when God's scale dwarfs our little maps, when the old frame that we have around God just no longer works. And God has to sweep away all our ideas, including our ideas of God, in order to draw us in, to be face to face with a reality that is both greater and gentler than we can imagine. Because this is God. So, Peter, James, and John, little did they know that their world and everything they had thought was real, everything they could count on, everything they planned for, the future they envisioned for themselves, everything that was nailed down, they thought, was about to collapse all around them. And so this day, this showing was a gift to them. They witnessed the glory, the reality of who Jesus is, so that later, when they were with him in the Garden of Gethsemane, and yes, heavy with sleep, seeing the anguish of Jesus and the struggle of Jesus, they would know that he freely embraced what was to come. And only after the resurrection would they understand that the day Jesus walked down that mountain from Tabor, he chose to walk into the very heart of the world. And by Good Friday, it would all play out. The cunning and the high priest and the governors and the backroom decisions and the plots and the plans to bring him down to destroy that Jesus. The betrayal, the lies, the unjust accusations, as the tentacles of evil spread, attempting to entangle him. His shining face would be bloodied, spat upon. His once dazzling clothes would be ripped from him. His broken, spent body would be spiked to the wood of the cross, and it would not appear to be glistening and shimmering. But, and this is God, but this would be his moment of glory, and this would be God's great triumph, that no tomb and none of the forces of death can hold him ever. And so a few takeaways from this as we enter into the season of Lent, as we slip down the slope into Ash Wednesday. There's a connection between the mountaintop experience of Jesus and the cross. It's this: there's no way to get through life without walking through suffering. And there's no way to get through suffering without having a living hope. And this is what God offers. You see, the Transfiguration is more than just one of those stories from the life of Jesus. The Transfiguration is ongoing, it's continuous, because Jesus continues to be the light and our living hope. And the sight of the Transfiguration now, the transformation, is through God's Spirit taking place within our lives and what we do together to serve others as a church. And the same Jesus who drew close to the frightened and flattened three that day continues to draw close to us, to reach out and to gently speak into the places where we are afraid, as he did with Peter, James, and John, saying to us, "Do not be afraid. Will you look up? Will you see me? I'm here with you." And finally, Jesus walked down the mountain that day into the heart of the world to be, as one of the mystics once wrote, to be light in the dark places, life in the places of our death, love in the cellars of our hate, and to find us again and again, and to join us at the point of our ultimate helplessness and make that very place the place of redemption. This is who he is. This is what Jesus accomplished. And lest we forget, we are left with just 3 words: listen to him.